He didn't even glance up from his screen when the words slipped out. Casual as a weather report. Starting next quarter. Sarah's taking over operations. You'll help her get up to speed. That was Jack Harlan, the CEO who'd built Apex Logistics from a garage startup into a powerhouse. The man I'd called mentor for 16 grueling years. I stood frozen in the conference room, my tablet still glowing with the quarterly performance deck I'd pieced together overnight, charts on supply chain efficiencies, risk models I'd engineered to weather economic storms. My finger lingered over the next slide, the one breaking down predictive analytics for vendor disruptions. But in that heartbeat, it all turned to ash. The air thickened with unspoken finality. He finally met my eyes, adding like an afterthought. You've always been a solid trainer, Ethan. A solid trainer. The phrase echoed in my skull, stripping away the late nights I'd spent debugging code that saved multi-million-dollar contracts, the crises I'd averted while everyone else slept. In that suspended moment, betrayal sank its teeth in, not loud, not fiery, but a quiet poison seeping through veins I'd thought were armored by loyalty. I didn't snap back, didn't raise my voice or demand explanations. I'd learned the hard way that outbursts in these glass-walled offices get twisted into unprofessionalism, filed away as ammunition for later. Instead, I powered down my tablet, nodded once, and walked out. Let them interpret the silence as shock, as acceptance. Let them underestimate the storm brewing beneath. That afternoon, Sarah breezed into my office, her designer heels clicking like victory steps, a notebook clutched under her arm as if it granted her expertise. She was all polished smiles and corporate glow, the kind that comes from climbing ladders others built. I'm excited to shadow you, she said, perching on the edge of my desk like we were old pals. I forced a neutral expression. Sure. Let's start with the basics. But I didn't dive into the proprietary algorithms I'd coded for real-time freight optimization. Didn't grant her access to the encrypted vendor protocols or the failover scripts that kept our global network humming through blackouts. I showed her the surface-level dashboards, pretty visuals, meaningless without the backbone. Over the following days, she tagged along in meetings, mangling metrics, suggesting tweaks that would have bottlenecked our transatlantic shipments. Jack watched from afar, beaming like a coach at a star player's debut, oblivious to how her innovations ignored latency thresholds and compliance red flags. Anger simmered in my chest, but I buried it deep. While they played at reinvention, I pored over my executive contract from the Series C funding round, zeroing in on Clause 7.4b, the safeguard I'd insisted on when investors fretted about key personnel risks. I drafted that clause myself, back when Apex was courting venture capital and the board demanded ironclad protections for core architects like me. It was embedded quietly. Any demotion or authority shift without my signed approval triggered immediate severance. Full equity vesting at peak valuation. With Apex hovering at a $520 million mark post Q4, my stake wasn't pocket change. I just needed to let their arrogance unfold. Documented and undeniable. Jack cornered me after a marathon audit on East Coast delays, his tone paternal, like he was doing me a favor. We've got big expansions ahead, new markets, fresh eyes from investors. Sarah's primed for ops lead. You'll report to her. Smooth the handover. He leaned against the doorframe, expecting gratitude. I clasped my hands, voice steady. That sounds like a restructure. Legal should vet the terms. My agreement has specifics on role changes. He waved it off with a laugh. No need for lawyers, Ethan. HR's got the memo ready. Let's keep it simple. Simple. The word twisted like a knife. But I held my tongue. He just activated the trap without realizing. his dismissal echoing the years of overlooked warnings I'd given about scalability pitfalls. I nodded agreeably. I'll look over the draft. He clapped my shoulder. Relieved. Blind to the ticking claws he'd ignited. I arrived at the office before dawn. As always. But this time with purpose, crisp shirt. No distractions. My mind a sharpened blade. Systems still bowed to my credentials. Nothing official had shifted yet. I wandered the humming server room, tracing the infrastructure I'd sculpted from chaos into precision. At 8:15, Sarah swept in, caffeinated and confident, waving like a conqueror. Jack trailed her, relaxed, assuming compliance. Ready to dive in? He asked, settling into a chair. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I placed a sealed envelope on the table, the same spot where I'd salvaged deals at midnight, mapped contingencies during strikes, sliding it toward him. I said calmly, I'm resigning. Effective immediately. The room inhaled sharply. A vacuum of disbelief. Jack's coffee mug halted midair, Sarah's smile fractured. What? He stammered. I laid out my badge, laptop, and the notarized severance notice without fanfare. He tore open the envelope, scanning, then rescanning, his face draining of color. Sarah whispered, This can't be serious. But it was no theatrics, no negotiation, just the cold execution of a betrayal repaid. I stood, turned, and left. The door's soft click sealing their fate as the systems purred on. Oblivious for now. By noon, the facade cracked. Legal's urgent emails flooded in. Calendar blocks stacking like dominoes. Jack scrambled to reroute a finance call. But my letter had already hit the key desks, General Counsel, Risk Head, and the Series C Investor Rep. Clause 7.4b wasn't a footnote, it was a fortress, mandating payout at top valuation plus accelerated equity if breached. My cut, $16.2 million. Non-negotiable. Jack dismissed it as overreach, but Legal unearthed the signatures his own. Rushed during funding frenzy when details blurred under pressure. Investors piled on. A lead from Vanguard Partners raged about undisclosed liabilities, demanding explanations for the 8-figure hit. An emergency board call convened that evening. No frills. Just the weight of miscalculation hanging heavy. I wasn't there. But the silence must have mirrored my own stifling. Accusatory. Jack's strategic shift had morphed into a hemorrhage. Every ignored contribution now a gaping wound in their projections. The next morning, Jack's bravado wilted into hedging. He looped finance for alternative scenarios, but the clause's math was merciless. Base pay, bonuses, stock, plus penalties for operational voids. The tally climbed to $16.8 million, excluding litigation. But the true venom struck clients, a West Coast distributor, flagged system lags, invoking SLAs tied to my custom protocols. Then a major rail partner halted a $10 million renewal, citing architect continuity concerns. Investors blanched. Without those deals, Q2 forecasts crumbled. Hiring froze. Expansions stalled. Jack called another board huddle, framing it as impact assessment, but it was his trial, scrutiny on how he'd undervalued the linchpin holding Apex together. The betrayal's echo rippled. My silence hadn't been weakness, it was the prelude to their unraveling. Cracks widened by day 2. Sarah botched her first solo call, stumbling over freight cascades, dismissing overrides as legacy. Partners documented the flubs, eroding trust. Meanwhile, I onboard quietly at Horizon Networks in Seattle, their CTO praising my past papers without fanfare. No spotlight, just veto power and equity in a rising firm. Clause 7.4b's timer ticked, 14 days to settle or forfeit rights to my pre-series B engines, still under my IP umbrella. Day 5. Their lawyers probed mine for equitable talks. Translation: desperation. Interest compounded, client defections mounted. A board member texted me, "Can we fix this?" I let it linger. Unanswered, echoing the dismissals I'd endured. My counsel replied crisply, clause. Amount. Deadline. No grudge. Just justice ticking inexorably. Horizon didn't pry. They valued the blueprint I carried. My first project? Integrating a former Apex client who'd jumped ship. Seeking the original sync designer. They signed without hesitation. Jack emailed vaguely. Touching base, but channels were severed, legal only. Apex's boardroom tensed further, slides on triggered clauses. Client pauses. My quiet acquisition oversight at Horizon snatching a key target they'd courted. It wasn't vengeance orchestrated, it was consequence unfolding. Owen Jack was sidelined to emeritus founder, a polite exile. Sarah retained her title, but led nothing. A consultant shadowing her shadows. I stayed invisible. No posts. No boasts. Passing Apex-branded hubs. I noted my protocols still humming beneath new veneers, freight moving on my unseen foundation. They didn't invoke my name. They just felt the void. Paying the price of silence betrayed.